I want to welcome everyone to a very healthy debate on the merits of Bitcoin as a long-term investment. Arguing in favor of Bitcoin is Noah Kaufman, who is a very successful early investor in Bitcoin, ER doctor, serial entrepreneur. Arguing against is Kirian Deso von Hest, who's a vocal financial markets analyst on Twitter and author of The Definitions of Money, The Definitions of Value, and Ethereal Value and the Crypto Future. The rules are simple. Each participant gets 5 minutes. I'll give a heads up at the 30-second mark. And yeah, that's the rules. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great.
Indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just start off with Noah. Noah, can you just introduce us to your bullish thesis on Bitcoin as a long-term investment?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Bitcoin, like all money, is a form of technology. It's a way to save today to spend tomorrow. And as with all monies, monies obviously have fundamental properties that I think everybody listening can either search or look up. But they involve scarcity and divisibility and non-counterfeitability and all these kind of things. And Bitcoin, like all technological advances, when you go from analog to digital, you get a programmable, typically a programmable technology that is optimizable. And so it's hard to understand what that means, but instead of saying, somebody's worth their salt, and salt is used as a medium of exchange and a store of value, like it was for Roman soldiers and whatnot, or the US dollar, or any other form of money, all of a sudden you get an improvable form of money that meets all the criteria of money in the way only really an invented technological advancement such as Bitcoin can. And so what's fascinating about that is we have to look at the old Wayne Gretzky, where the puck is going. And Bitcoin may not be perfect today, but it's headed there, and there are all sorts of second layer and third layer solutions that are just pretty mind blowing. And then so there are problems with Bitcoin. Obviously, it's early. It's a network, and much like Facebook was one of the original social networks, obviously it supplanted MySpace and others. Bitcoin is a very early nascent technology that stores value, and the way it does that is absolutely incredible. It has a supply which is impervious to its demand, and we've never really seen that with anything else in the world. It's guaranteed digital scarcity, and then of course there's a difficulty adjustment baked in, which is fascinating and introduces game theory. And it's part of the reason why it doesn't matter if like a China shuts down its mining. That just is going to benefit the United States of America or whoever else is wherever those miners go and wherever the network kind of builds on its mining and its strength. And so it also follows network mechanistics such as Metcalfe's law, and it's valued as the number of its nodes, the number of its users grow. And since it's being adopted so rapidly, it's just ever increasing in value. And it's really kind of the first ever yardstick that we've actually had for measuring value that is not changeable. It's like when you go to build a house, if you have a measuring stick that is changing, you're going to get this cockamamie, Pablo Picasso house, right? Because if the yardstick is 1.4 one day and then 0.48 the next day, and you're building this house. So if you're building a financial future for yourself, then Bitcoin is really the only true yardstick, because you finally have a supply and demand which is understood and which you can actually plug variables into equations. You can't do that with the US dollar. Nobody knows how many there are. So the supply of Bitcoin is known. We've mined about 88% of or 89% of the Bitcoin that are going to be mined. and demand is ever increasing because of network adoption. Only about 1% of the world is into Bitcoin right now, and of course it's arguable. But so for the purpose of this debate, I choose to store my money mostly in Bitcoin. I'm still diversified, but Bitcoin has been appreciating over 200% a year, CAGR for the last 11 years or whatever. There's no reason that should really stop, although of course it could, and Bitcoin could go to zero. I mean, there's all kinds of arguments against Bitcoin. So I'm going to try and take a very high level 30,000 foot view, and I won't really be arguing specific data or facts except for to point out that
you have 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. Except for to point out that there are refutations which are qualitative to all these things. So Bitcoin is the purest and best money ever made, and it has a non-zero allocation kind of demand for every single person's portfolio.
Excellent. So Deso, what do you have to say to that bullish thesis?
Well, I suppose the first question we're going to get into and debate is value itself, because my rebuttal would be that Bitcoin has no value and it stores no value, simply because one of the reasons is that it is technology. And as such, we have not currently in operation any first generation tech that was ever invented. Even gold was invented as electrum. So that was a very high grade silver and ore combined ore that was found in Egypt. And well, the reason why it was never separated is because they didn't have fire hot enough to melt the metals. Bitcoin, in that sense, will also be supplanted by the next technology. It is true that Bitcoin is upgradable, but that is upgradable by consensus. The Bitcoin protocol, for instance, works by vote. And as I understand it, whoever holds more has a higher voting percentage. So there's still a question of vested interest there. Now, the main question of value, to keep it at a 30,000 foot level, is what value does Bitcoin store? And my answer is it stores no value. Sure, you can buy Bitcoin for $1,000, $10,000, $100,000, but does that mean it has value? When you buy a gold bar for whatever price it has at that time, you know you're buying a gold bar. What does that do? Well, it does what gold does. It is non-reactive. It is used in industry, for instance, though it can be heavily substituted, and it has a monetary history. But that isn't specifically necessary. If you couldn't trade gold anymore, then you would still be able to craft jewelry out of it. The value Bitcoin store, I argue, is the transactional capability of the network. So Noah is right in the fact that the value of Bitcoin is in fact in the network, but it is not in the size of the network, it is in the capabilities of the network. For instance, if the Bitcoin network grew twice as large, but for some reason could only transact half as much, then it would retain the capabilities it has today, which means however many transactions it does right now, which varies as well. Often quoted as the 4 transactions per second, but June this year it reached almost 1 transaction per second at its lowest point. So the fact that Bitcoin has gone up in dollar price, which have its own issues like stable coins, pumping up the price, and et cetera, which I'm sure we'll get into. But in terms of value, market price just isn't a good measure of value, because the market can be misled, the market can be manipulated. We've seen this in various areas in traditional finance. So in that sense, I guess it's just best to get into the value debate of what value is stored and how, because as long as it's transactional value, for instance, Ethereum is better because Ethereum can transact more, do it at less energy, and has more functionality in terms of smart contracts, for instance. So if the next generation of proof of work is invented that is even more efficient, then Bitcoin has even less value. And what does Bitcoin do? that is the question. What does Bitcoin do? Well, it allows you to trustlessly transact. And I have stated many times, even in my original article on my website, why I hate Bitcoin and why Tether will end up killing it, is that trustless transactions and distributed ledgers do have value. So I'm not against crypto at all. It's just that in my opinion, there is a real problem with the token itself, the Bitcoin that rolls out of the entire process. That has no value because, well, it represents the transactional value of the network. And the transactional value of the network is 1 transaction per second at the cost of Austria, the power of a small country. And we can get into the efficiency and power usage arguments as well later. But that's how I would start off.
Excellent. Great. So then over to Noah. Is there any inherent value stored in Bitcoin?
Well, sure. First, let me say that Deso brings up a lot of great points, and they make sense. Look, I mean, it's hard to really fathom such an amazing invention. It's like before the airplane was made, even when the airplane was made, up until the point it was made, it was something that was fictitious, that would never happen. But even when it was made, there were, thousands of critics and perhaps more who thought it would never become anything serious other than just a flight of fancy. Let's start with the value of Bitcoin. Well, first off, Deso rightly says markets can be manipulated and they can be wrong. But look, the market is the way that humans value any good or service, okay? So if the market tells you that a house is worth $1 million, it doesn't matter if you think the house is worth $900,000. It doesn't matter if you think the house is worth 0. The market's willing to pay. There's someone who's willing to pay $1 million. So Bitcoin right now is at whatever it's at, $49,000. That's what Bitcoin is worth. That is the price that the market is giving to Bitcoin. And that has been uniformly going up for the last 11 years, which starts to bring in the Lindy effect. I mean, it's been there, it's been successful. It's the largest cryptocurrency by market cap. And so I would say, and I would posit that the value of Bitcoin right now is $49,000. That's what the whole world thinks in an extremely liquid 24/7 market. If the value were different, given all the information, markets, if you think markets are efficient, and sure, we can argue that maybe they're not, but overall, over a long period of time, markets are efficient. And the market is valuing Bitcoin at a certain price. That is ipso facto what Bitcoin is worth, and what its value is to human beings right now. You can argue all you want, but Bitcoin has a price, and that's what it's worth. I can sell a Bitcoin right now for $49,000. I wouldn't, because $49,000 are useless, in the grand scheme of things, I think, because the yardstick is constantly shrinking. And $49,000 today is going to be $150,000 in X number of years. And that's what's happening with Bitcoin. You've got a certain number of Bitcoin, and more people are wanting them because of the growth of the network. So another point that Deso made was Bitcoin will be supplanted by the next iteration. Also a very good point. Look, I think that you could have said that about Facebook, and maybe it's still true. Maybe Facebook will be supplanted by the next iteration. However, we know from from studying networks and Metcalfe's law and whatnot, that just about any network in the world that reaches a certain critical level passes a tipping point where it's not going to be caught, where it's not going to be supplanted, because the power of the network itself. What's going to happen? Let's say Deso and I go make a better Bitcoin, and I think there might be better Bitcoins out there. There might be better technology. There might be, Bitcoin can be programmed, as Deso said. It can be. There's a second layer solution, a third layer solution. DeFi is coming on Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the dominant network, and it's the only immutable, incorruptible store of value. Ethereum, for example, you've got all these guys, you got Vitalik and all the, I don't know if that's the thing, but you got all these guys, who could be leaned on by the government. You don't really know how many Ethereum there are. There's all kinds of wishy-washy. They change the protocol, they do this. Bitcoin is this simple open source code that anybody can look at. And, it's just unlikely to be supplanted by anything because it is already being adopted as the primary monetary network. And that's what gives it value. Its value is in the fact that I can store a Bitcoin and I know that my Bitcoin is going to maintain its value, and probably against the US dollar or other things like gold or whatever, it's going to go up in those kind of like cross-relational values. One Bitcoin is always going to be one Bitcoin to me. And eventually I think, the world will price energy and all sorts of
30 seconds.
Thank you. Hard assets in Bitcoin. So, there's a lot more to kind of get at there. Transactional ability, I agree, it's slow right now for Bitcoin, but that's a feature. That's not like a flaw. Like we want to store value in it. It's a unit of monetary value right now. It's not a medium of exchange. That will come on the second and third layer because it's a technology. So I'll stop there, but there's so much. He brought up so many good points.
Absolutely. So then, Deso, over to you.
I'll just continue the debate. I mean, we'll get through them all eventually. So you said something about the Lindy effect or something? Sounds like recency bias to me. And what recency bias is simply because everything went fine so far, it will go fine in the future. Normalcy bias, same thing over a longer period of time. Because nothing's ever gone bad, nothing will go bad. Now, many people still think about that way about the fiat system. I've had many problems convincing my father, for instance, to buy gold and silver because he said it's always worked out. So that's recency bias. And it offers absolutely no protection against the network no longer being number one, because things might change. For instance, China might ban all its miners. For example, Binance is being banned all over the world. And while Bitcoin does not need exchanges, and I very much am aware of that, because it is truly decentralized, that doesn't mean it'll be easier to exchange. And with less convenience comes a lower price, simply because, well, penny stocks are all OTC desk as well. It's just human behavior. Now, what Noah also said is that the market values what it's worth, and that's basically comes out of the efficient market hypothesis, and that is that the market is always efficient. I dispute that, and I dispute that tremendously. If you look at the market right now, there are nothing but extremely manipulated valuations due to, for instance, 120 billion a month in quantitative easing that is still happening. And that is affecting all assets, even crypto in some way. So, and the fact that if you think that the market price is the correct price, then you also have to say that the price of Tesla is correct, for instance, at 1,400 PE. You have to say that the market value of nuclear power is correct, even though the entire sector is about $30 billion worth. So you could buy about 23 uranium sectors with Tesla alone, even though uranium is the only chance we have for a CO2-free future, for instance. So I would argue that the market is more often wrong than it is right. It does tell you something about the valuation of things, but it is perceived value. It is not true value. It is not intrinsic value. And the intrinsic value of Bitcoin simply is its transactional capability, which, as Noah said, might be upgraded in the future, but I would argue that it won't be, simply because of stuff like the Lightning Network being introduced years ago as a concept, and it's still not really operational. And I know that it has problems with that as well. And we'll get into upgrades later. But in Noah says that Bitcoin is the perfect store of value, but in your own opening, you said just now that Bitcoin could go to zero in the future. Well, if Bitcoin can go to zero, it's absolutely not a perfect store of value. And the reason why both those things, well, it's not store value, but the reason why it can go to zero is not because of supply. Bitcoin enthusiasts, not specifically you, but in general, because you've heard it a lot, talk about the limited supply of Bitcoin, but it's not supply that matters. If you have 21,000 limited supply, then it would be worth much more than 21 million maximum supply. But if nobody wants the thing, then it does not matter. Bitcoin Cash has a limited supply as well, as far as I know. And Bitcoin Cash is much more a traditional Bitcoin, I guess. But it has not even close to the amount of value, even though it also has a network that secures it. And the question of how big the network is, well, if the network doesn't produce anything, it doesn't really matter how big the network is. It still doesn't have value. Like 10 times 0 is 0 and 1 times 0 is 0. But, so the power of the network, which Noah's talked about, comes from basically what the network does. The network produces. And in Bitcoin's case, it produces 1 to 4 transactions per second. There are other things that can also produce 1 to 4 or even more transactions per second. It's just a question of, do they do that trustlessly? If so, then they are equal to Bitcoin at least, if not better, if they do it more efficiently. Also, Noah said it's an immutable store of value, but that basically is derived from the dollar price. And Noah also says that the dollar is basically worthless, with which I agree. But that also means that if Bitcoin stores dollar value, then Bitcoin is still worthless. All right. Well, lastly, I will comment on being slow is a feature and not a flaw, which is a hell of a comment, hell of a quote. But I would say no. No, it's always better to be faster and more efficient at the same task.
Thank you. Thanks, Deso. Those are great points. Over to Noah.
Yeah, faster is definitely better usually. I would say, though, that if you're trying to store value in something, then faster is not necessarily better. So, for example, transferring gold, you can't do that very fast or very easily, especially large quantities of gold. Bitcoin is not yet a medium of exchange. It's not trying to be. It's a store of value. It's a digital gold, and it's going after the gold market cap, which at $10 to $12 trillion would put Bitcoin at $500,000 a coin or thereabouts. Just because it's not right now a fast medium of exchange, and it can only do 1 to 4 transactions per second, none of those are anything I would argue. However, those solutions are coming because this is a programmable technology, and that's the fascinating thing. This is a completely unique and amazing invention, wherein we can program this money to make it better and better and better. Just like the social networks have been programmed, and the algorithms, for better or for worse, are becoming better and better. So I don't think the value of the Bitcoin network has anything to do with its transactional volume or capacity. I think it has to do with the fact that it is the most perfect store of value that the world has ever seen, with finally definable metrics. And people agree. I mean, look, the network is growing. There are more and more users of Bitcoin every year, more and more unique addresses, more and more capital inflows. It doesn't seem like that's going to stop. So people are voting with their dollars and their renminbi and gold and silver, which is being converted at a very rapid pace, into Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is proving its value. Deso had some very, very interesting points about the market being wrong more than it is right. And he was arguing the market efficiency hypothesis. And I think that's a valid, just as valid of an opinion. However, remember that the market is using the yardstick of the dollar. So when you look at the price of Tesla, the price of Tesla is the price of Tesla, given the current market conditions, given the current data, given the current zero bound, yields, and given interest rates, and given how many dollars are circulating in the system. And guess what? If there were 100, let's say, 18 quintillion dollars in the system, the price of Tesla would be $2,600,000. And guess what? That would be the price of Tesla, because we're dealing with a completely bogus yardstick. If you want to price Tesla, price it in Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is a static yardstick, and you will see the actual price of Bitcoin. As a matter of fact, price anything in Bitcoin and you'll see what's been happening. The market has not been going straight up like you think. The dollar has been crashing. And if you denominate the appreciation of any asset in Bitcoin terms, you can see that most assets are either good at holding their value, like real estate or maybe gold and silver to a degree, but and maybe even the stock market, because there's always value in ownership of equity. But the US dollar is crashing, and what we're seeing is a slow motion crash. Bitcoin is the escape raft. Exchanges failing, so what? There's going to be new exchanges coming up that are going to follow regulations. I mean, that's an easy one. Lindy effect, which sounds like recency bias. Sure, gold and silver have a 5,000 year Lindy effect that is recency bias, because it's always been that way. Wait, give me my
recency bias is recency.
Write it down. And
sorry.
Yeah. No, you're good. So I agree with a lot of the points, but the thing is, they're all refutable. And at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding. And guess what? Bitcoin is being adopted, it's being accepted, and the price is going up. It's like everybody who didn't want to everybody who was a PC and didn't want a Mac or didn't want an iPhone, or, back in 2000. I was one of them. I was like, this is like fancy schmancy, blah, 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 blah. But you know what? The whole network had such a powerful value intrinsically that it grew. And it became this, behemoth. And Apple is one of the most amazing companies and technologies that ever existed. So Bitcoin is very early in its growth trajectory. It's a nascent store of value and a technological breakthrough. And it's something that's probably going to be around for a while. All right, when I say it can go to zero, anything can go to zero. My time's up?
Yeah, it is.
Anything can go to zero.
I interrupted, so.
Yeah, no worries. I'll just finish the sentence. Anything can go to zero. I'm just trying to be open-minded. I think it would be foolish to say, look, this is 100% going to $1 million a coin. So I'll stop there, but I think that, you have to consider all these things in more of a gray zone and take evidence of what's actually happening in the world. And what's actually happening is Bitcoin is becoming adopted and it's going up in value.
All right. Thanks, Noah. Go ahead, Deso.
Well, again, that is measured in dollars. And then the question is, again, what is the value of the dollar? So,
touche, yeah.
Just to go back to that, because if you said price things in Bitcoin instead of dollars, well, fine. I'll price the price of Tesla stock in Bitcoin at the start of 2018 and at the end of 2018. Because Tesla price only went up and Bitcoin went from 20,000 to what was it, 4,000, something like that. It's not much of a store of value then. Also, I was there on the March 2020 crash, March 13th, I believe. And I have a screenshot on my PC saying that Bitcoin reduced in value by 66% in 24 hours and Ethereum dropped by 88%. So, that is not very much value. However, you also said that everything can go to zero, and I disagree with that. Gold cannot go to zero. It can go lower, it can be suppressed, but it cannot go to zero, and that goes to the utility value of gold, because gold is used as gold. You can't substitute gold as gold. I mean, you can't substitute it in industry, for instance, but you cannot make a non-golden piece of jewelry a golden piece of jewelry. That cannot happen. And in case of Bitcoin, you can replace Bitcoin with all the other trustlessly transaction coins out there. And you said it was unique and amazing. And I say there's 11,000 plus cryptocurrencies currently listed on CoinMarketCap, which used to be 9,000 back in March. when I started writing my books. So also, it's not that unique. And of course, somebody could just copy the software of Bitcoin because it's open source, change a few parameters, and there you have another Bitcoin. And the question just becomes, what is the value of one Bitcoin over the other one? And you say people use the other one more. That's not specifically a point of value, because what do the other ones use Bitcoin for? Well, to trustlessly transact. But if Bitcoin cannot trustlessly transact, then it doesn't have value, because then it doesn't do anything. You might as well just put a notepad file on your computer and type in a number. That also perfectly stores that number. So what else did I have? Yeah, I hear a lot about how fiat is a bogus yardstick, but Bitcoin does not have any value other than fiat. Everything you've said so far, because the network has grown. Well, the network has grown in response to the increase in price. The adoption, so-called adoption, also has been in response to the increase in price, because Google Trends clearly shows that people start looking for crypto after the price has gone up. Also, stuff like Tether can manipulate the price of cryptocurrencies by offering liquidity that is not actually liquid. It's well, it is, as you say, if Bitcoin is priced in dollars and you have something else that is also priced in dollars at $1 exactly, and there's a lot of things of both of them trading for that same thing priced in both, well, then the demand comes from both. And that is something I think I want to get into more now, is specifically supply and demands, because that also comes back in my second book, The Book of Value, because it's one of the ways where we measure value. And it's important to note that demand comes before supply. If right now nobody demanded gold anymore, then indeed gold could go to zero. It's just that the fact that that cannot happen because of reasons, well, that I described in my book, but to short again, because gold is gold and it does what gold does. What Bitcoin does can be substituted with Ethereum right now. And sure, it has different voting control risks, I guess you could call it, with Vitalik being in charge and everything. But there's nothing stopping you from just copying Ethereum and having nobody in charge, just basically creating a final version of the software that is truly immutable, because, again, Bitcoin is immutable as well. If the Lightning Network is added, then Bitcoin inherits the risks of the Lightning Network and not Bitcoin anymore. It's then Lightning Bitcoin. But again, to bring it back to Tether, right now, in this very moment, a lot of the demand for Bitcoin is priced in tethers, meaning that if Tether would go away, that demand in tethers would also go away. And there's absolutely zero guarantee that that demand would switch to dollar demand. And obviously, there's a lot of demand for Bitcoin in other cryptocurrencies as well. But what makes Tether special is that it's valued at $1. It's pegged to $1. And the market so far still believes that, because they've never been audited. The moment that reality stops is the moment that a lot of dollar demand for Bitcoin is simply going to vanish, because it was never there to begin with. And when that does, well, then the dollar price of Bitcoin must also collapse. So what value does Bitcoin store at this moment? Well, it's mostly a lot of tethers.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Deso.
Okay. Well, first, let's talk about Tesla. I'm just going to address your points one by one. Tesla,
sure,
priced in Bitcoin, and look, you can grab any small time frame and cherry pick and show almost anything you want with just about any stock or asset. I can show you with gold or silver. I could show you periods of time where they absolutely crashed and collapsed against any other asset class multiple times throughout history. So, look, I agree with you there that there is not always an efficient market, that there are market inefficiencies based on fear and greed and human emotions. And those are opportunities generally for market participants to create alpha. So let's real quick, when you say gold can't go to zero, I mean, I can offer you a very easy thought experiment. Technology advancing at the pace it is. Let's say that tomorrow, my buddy, the material scientist and chemist, creates true alchemy and creates gold, and he does it in a way where you just pour water and salt and a couple other cheap things together, and he actually makes gold. Okay, well, that's not outside of the realm of possibility. And then gold is flooded with innumerable supply. And then guess what? All of a sudden, his buddy creates a new material that's even better. And then people stop valuing gold in jewelry, and they're like, "Oh, this is more rare than, or this is more common than copper." And so there is a conceivable circumstance where gold, along with anything else, goes to zero. We mentioned that you could replace Bitcoin with any one of the 11,000 other cryptos. I mean, that makes no sense. None of the other cryptos are completely decentralized the way Bitcoin is. They all have development teams. They're all, to varying degrees, not immutable, not incorruptible. They all have strengths and weaknesses, and some of them may actually hold value, but just like the .com bust, most will probably fail and go to zero. I think everybody wants to make money, and that is part of the reason why Bitcoin is going up in value. It's because people want to make money, and they see that the value of Bitcoin goes up notionally in dollar terms. And so it's taking advantage of human greed and of these very fundamental human emotions that are tied to, how do I store the value of the work that I've done, of the production that I've created? Well, outside of other hard assets, Bitcoin, which is the hardest asset that we've ever made and is only going to get harder, and has the technology to improve in every way. People are voting with their dollars and with their gold and whatnot, because, look, I own a bunch of gold and silver, physical gold and silver that I have in a safe. And I own derivatives. I own all kinds of gold and silver miners. Guess what? I've been converting it to Bitcoin. I'm not the only one. I convert my salary to Bitcoin. I convert, and I'm overweight Bitcoin. I have a big position, but I also don't have all of my assets in it. I am a Bitcoin maxi. However, and other maxis, I'm sure, are going to shoot me down over this, but I also have alts. I have altcoins that I think are going to do well because I'm going to convert them into Bitcoin. I'm going to convert everything into Bitcoin as the network grows, becomes more secure and more valuable. So you said, we could create another Bitcoin just by copying the code. 100%. You are absolutely right. Guess what? We can create another United States just by going to an island, putting a flag down and saying, this is the United States. Everybody come over here. It's a better version. We redid the Constitution. It's got this, this, and this, and this. It's better. Y'all are going to love it here. It's the United States. Come on over. It's going to be like crickets. That's not the way it works. The value of Bitcoin is in the network itself and how large the network is growing. It's not only the code. The code was the seed, and then the network, the tree, this beautiful organism that's growing. That's the value of this of Bitcoin. It's this network. It's all the participants, all the players, all the nodes, and the safety of being together. Tether, there was a recent study in 2020 by Dr. Lyons out of Berkeley that, and I'm going to quote him here. Our bottom line, we find no systemic evidence of stablecoin issuance driving cryptocurrency prices. I mean, we can get into Tether, but Tether has been this whole murky quagmire for many years. And I hope Tether collapses. I hope it collapses and we have price discovery and we see if it does anything. But guess what? It's got nothing to do with Bitcoin in 5 to 10 years from now. So bring it,
Thanks, Noah.
Tether, we'll go to USDC, wherever. So I yield.
Well, I'll agree with that. Tether should be dead in the next 5 years and we'll all be better for it. Anyway, to jump back to your last analogy of the United States, If you create a second landmass that's as big as the United States, has the same resources as the United States, and is basically the way the United States was in 1600, more or less minus the Indians, because we don't have to repeat that, people will definitely immigrate there en masse. Are you kidding me? Land will be super cheap, resources abundant. People will go there. Of course, if you create a very small island and call it the United States, it's not really the United States. So I do get your point in that the network does determine the size of it. However, I would again remind you that if people leave the network now, en masse, say 99% of it is removed, all the computers, but the 1% is still left, then the network still achieves the same thing, 1 to 4 transactions per second, because it automatically adjusts its difficulty, meaning that the same is achieved with less power usage. So in that sense, the value of the network is actually negative, because the bigger it gets, the more power it uses, and it doesn't actually do anything more. Now, I do understand scalability and that the requirements of the size of the network is security. It wastes all this power because it makes it also secure. So in that sense, it's not entirely a waste. However, in my books, I simply redirect this energy to some tasks that we do need to have done, namely mathematical research, instead of calculating a lot of wrong hashes that ultimately serve only security. If you can find another way to do security, all the other energy is wasted. Anyway, to go back to the very first comment you said, that I'm using a very small time frame to cherry pick the price of Bitcoin. And I did that on purpose because you walked right into my trap. Because in my notes, I have 4 annotations that say, well, the first one I missed, but you did it in your opening statements. But second one is immutable store of value. And then you say the network is a perfect store of value. And then you said at some point again, Bitcoin will maintain its value. Well, if I can cherry pick a period wherein it didn't store its value because its value changed, then it's not a perfect store of value, is it? It may be a store of value, but everything is a store of value. If you want it to be the words that you use, immutable and perfect, then it must maintain its value. And I can cherry pick areas where it didn't. So, ergo, it must not perfectly store value. Also, you have said multiple times that, you just argued that other crypto aren't immutable. But you also, in your opening statements, said that Bitcoin can be updated. Well, what is it? Is Bitcoin immutable, or can it be updated? And if it can be updated, then Lightning Network becomes possible. But if it can't be updated, then Lightning Network can't become possible, because the moment you add a Lightning Network, it becomes something other than Bitcoin. Again, Lightning Bitcoin. So, and the decentralization aspect of it, I again question because of vested interests. How does the Bitcoin protocol or open source or society or foundation or whatever actually controls it? How do they decide what gets in and what gets out? Well, that's probably consensus. How is that made? Well, it is made by either vested interests or attention seeking. Somebody can just pay people a lot of money to vote their way. It's not immutable at all. And one of the things I would say that proves this much is that many of the problems that Bitcoin has had up to this point haven't been resolved simply because people haven't voted in favor of the solutions. Something like, say, a block size increase. I know there have been block wars and everything, but Bitcoin, I posit, didn't win out simply because it had the right block size. It had the biggest network and the most marketing materials. So the most people were convinced that Bitcoin was the way to go.
30 seconds.
So my final question on alchemy. If alchemy is invented, then gold still won't go to zero because you need transportation costs and generation costs. Because even if you use very cheap materials, they still have an existence in the real world, and thus must be either put together, and that uses energy, so you can still calculate in an energy cost. And then still wouldn't have a value of zero because only gold is gold. If you alchemize gold into new gold, meaning you create a fake bar out of nothing, well, then it is still gold, then it is not fake, and it has the properties of gold. People will want it for jewelry, people will want it for various stuff. There are examples of this in history. For instance, the Aztecs did not use gold as a medium of exchange. They used cocoa beans because they had so much gold while living in mountainous terrain and swamps while never inventing the wheel that the carrier weight alone, compared to the amount of supply there was, basically made it worthless as a transactional medium. So there is indeed an instance in history where gold wasn't used as a transaction medium, even though it was abundant.
All right, thanks.
It still had, I just want to add this, it still had religious and societal value. It was still very much used. I believe they called it the poo of the earth or something, the poo of the sun. They had a sun god, so whatever. But it was still very much used in religious icons, jewelry and such. But it wasn't used as a transactional medium.
All right, thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and grant you a point. Maybe gold doesn't go to 0, so it goes to $1. But let's move on. Okay, so an analogy about the U.S. and if you made a new landmass with equal size and resources, that people would flock there. Dude, there's no McDonald's there. There's no highway systems. Who's going to go there? Are you going to go there? I'm not going to go there. Okay, so yeah, let's say we've got like 0.0000001% of, people want to go there. They bring guns, they bring some ammunition, they try and make a country. I mean, are you kidding me? You think people are going to go and like, yeah, maybe people will go and try and mine gold there or do whatever. Maybe there'll be adventurers, but I don't think so. I think the U.S. as a network, I think it would be a joke. And if it happened, it would take hundreds of years. It certainly wouldn't become sovereign because, somebody would claim it or fight for it or take it. So just no on that one. Again, there's no McDonald's there. So who's going to go? So power consumption in the Bitcoin network, fascinating topic. When you think about it, all we're doing when we save, when we talk about money as a store of value at its kind of most basic level, is we're talking about storing sunlight. How do we capture and store sunlight? Well, you can store it in firewood, which can be used later to burn and create light and heat, and you can do it in oil, you can do it all sorts of things. Well, Bitcoin does the same thing. Bitcoin mining, power consumption of the network, it draws energy out of the earth, and it stores it in a way that you can use it later. So I can sell one of my Bitcoin now and I can buy a lot of firewood, okay? And guess what? Every single year since Bitcoin was created, I can buy more and more firewood as denominated in any other asset class. So, again, the proof is in the pudding, and we're seeing what's actually happening, which is the adoption of a new monetary network. Again, the value of the network is in the size of the network, the safety of the network, and the ability of the network to store value. And if you want to say ultimately transact, well, then look, I hear what you're saying. And if we're talking about Bitcoin as like a transactional unit, which I don't even know if it's going to ever get there. I think Bitcoin is a store of value. Maybe it's going to be like gold. Maybe we'll get to $500,000 of Bitcoin in notional value. And who knows what that even means, because like you said, the price of $1 is useless. Maybe that's worth $20,000 of today's money. Who knows? Maybe it's worth $400,000 of today's money. But what I'm saying is that the network doesn't need to transact. If it does, it can do it on the second or third layer. Like you said, you brought up immutability. Well, immutability is talking about the supply of Bitcoin not changing, the other basic elements of Bitcoin not changing. Bitcoin's actually a very, very simple little snippet of code. It's not that solves some very basic problems of the Byzantine general and not being able to have an electronic copy of money. So it's actual digital scarcity. That's the breakthrough here, the digital scarcity. That's what creates the value and what creates this yardstick that, yes, could be changed if 51% of all participants and nodes and designers and the team around the world, if everybody agreed, look, we need an extra zero on the end, you could do that. We need 22 million for some reason. You could do that, but nobody, there's nobody would do that if it, if it conflicted with their own personal, the value of Bitcoin. And then to suggest that everybody would, it would need to be an unprecedented network decision that the whole of humanity basically agreed with. And if it did that, look, everybody who's involved has, let's say, millions of dollars of Bitcoin, whatever it is. If they want to make a change that made their Bitcoin worth less, why would they do that? Why? That's not the human nature. So, but is it possible? Sure. Just like gold could go to $1. I think it's entirely possible. So
30 seconds.
Okay. It's kind of a silly claim to think that the value is in, that there is no value because it's replicable and that it's somehow not immutable or that it's not copyable. The value is in the size of the network, the safety, and what it actually does. And Bitcoin's the only thing that does that. And that's why it's going up in value.
Great. Thanks, Noah.
Well, again, we agree on one thing, that's the value and what it does. But again, what it does is transact 1 to 4 transactions per second. You said what I think is a very silly thing is that the network doesn't need to transact. Well, then Bitcoin literally does nothing. And absolutely does nothing because the Bitcoin is the transactions. I know that much. So if you have Bitcoin, a network, if you have Bitcoin in a wallet and the network isn't there to transact, then that Bitcoin cannot move from that wallet. You cannot store it anywhere else because you would essentially be able to just copy the software, Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V. You have twice as many Bitcoin. You have 4 times as many Bitcoin. You have 1,000 times as many Bitcoin. That would kill the immutable aspect of the network. So it's not the value of Bitcoin is never located in any specific one Bitcoin. It is located in the network. And the network's value is to transact. And Bitcoin does it at 1 to 4 transactions per second, which makes it valued less than everything else that can do the same at more transactions per second trustlessly. So you said it stores sunlight. Well, I've heard this thing before, and this is an argument that comes from Michael Saylor, I know. This whole monetary energy thing, it's bullshit. And there's no other way to say it, but if you take a Bitcoin and you toss it in the furnace, you're not going to get any energy back. So if you want to store sunlight by putting a solar panel on the roof and using direct sunlight to generate energy to transact the Bitcoin, well, if you turn the solar panel off, you can't transact the Bitcoin anymore because you need more electricity to transact it again. So what energy is stored? Coal stores energy, uranium stores energy, batteries store energy in a limited sort of fashion. But anything that uses energy to effectively work and then needs more energy to work again cannot store any energy. If you use energy to use a pair of scissors to cut hair, then you cannot then toss that pair of scissors into a furnace and get more energy out of it. No, if you want to cut more hair, you need to use it more. And you need to eat more food, use your body more, move throughout space, and work. So it's impossible for crypto to store energy because crypto uses energy to function, just like anything else in our world, except for stuff that can store energy denser than it requires for us to generate it. For instance, oil, which costs us absolutely nothing to pump up, not thinking about fracking, very little to transport. And that's just because hydrocarbons are a very dense form of energy. But fiat can't store monetary energy because monetary energy isn't a thing. Gold can't store monetary energy because monetary energy is not a thing. I don't really know what more to say about that. But the last thing, as in my reply, is or not 2 things still. The breakthrough is not Bitcoin; it's blockchain, and blockchain and Bitcoin are not mutable, are not intrinsically linked. Of course, Bitcoin has to be a blockchain because that's what Bitcoin is. But a blockchain does not have to be Bitcoin because Ethereum, for instance, different blockchain, still a blockchain, not Bitcoin. Which leads me right into my last rebuttal as who would make a decision to make it worth less? Well, Ethereum recently made the decision to make the network worth less. And I'll explain that. Recently, Ethereum forked their or implemented a proposal to make Ethereum a deflationary currency, meaning that over time there will be less and less and less of it. Or at least that's the expected effect. I'm not going to talk technicals. But this means that the network has become worth less. And I'll tell you how. Even though the dollar price will go up because of scarcity, there is more dollars versus less Ethereum, thus the price goes up. It really is that simple. As long as demand stays equal, because if Ethereum demand crashes, Ethereum dies as well. However, because there is less and less Ethereum available, and it is being used as an intermediary, not dollar Ethereum intermediary, but as a network intermediary. It costs second layer crypto, Ethereum, to transact on top of the Ethereum blockchain. So as you decrease the amount of Ethereum in circulation and the dollar price goes up, so too must the transaction fee of Ethereum.
30 seconds.
If you use just one Ethereum to transact and that Ethereum is now worth $2, your transaction fee is now $2. If it goes up to $5, your transaction fee is now $5. And even though it's measured in dollars, it does indicate that it becomes harder and harder to acquire this liquidity, and thus it becomes harder and harder to transact with it, and thus the secondary and third layer systems will simply lose more and more value because they become more and more inefficient or less and less convenient to use because you have to input more and more effort to make them work.
All right. Thanks, Deso.
Yeah, I totally agree. Ethereum's useless and worthless, and it's one of the other 10,999 cryptos that are probably gonna go away. I own some Ethereum because I hope it goes up and I can transfer it into Bitcoin, but that's just a gambling game.
That's speculation.
It's speculation. It's all speculation. What's not speculation like? And we're all gonna die. So
It's got very dark.
Well, so look, let's start. Bitcoin as a unit of exchange and the 1 to 4 transactions per second. You're right. I did say that we don't need to consider transactional ability as part of the network value, and I said that in reference to it being gold, and a digital gold and a digital store of value. You're right. You still need to be able to send it somewhere. So, for example, and I think that solutions to unit of exchange and medium of exchange are coming, and those will be different, and transactional volumes will be much higher. I'm not sure if that's even necessary for the Bitcoin network to have the value that it does. I think it's being valued right now without that. But certainly you can get on global strike, and I can be paid in Bitcoin for no fees. I can transfer money to Ecuador for no fees because of the amazing work that Jack Mallers et al. Are doing. But let's talk about Bitcoin for a second as a transactional store of value. And you're right. I didn't mean to imply that it's not important at all. You need to have transactability. So recently, $1.4 billion was transferred in about 20 minutes for about $7, okay, with Bitcoin. Try doing that with any other asset class. You can't do it with truckloads of fiat paper. You can't do it with gold. You could do it with the press of a button by the Fed from one central bank to another by repos and swaps and something, but then again, you're transferring 1 over unit infinity, which has dubious value because there is no yardstick associated with the U.S. dollar. We've seen it lose 99% of its value. I know you're on board with all of that. So, and when we talk about the energy that the system takes and throwing Bitcoin into a furnace, that's the true genius of it. Bitcoin is like a zip file, okay? It stores the value in a truncated way on a network. It only costs maybe, it costs me like $1 to transfer $100,000 worth of current value as denominated in US dollars of Bitcoin. That's a lot of firewood. So like where the rubber meets the road, I can actually buy a ton of firewood, and it's going to cost me $1 to unlock the energy that's stored in my Bitcoin. The energy is being stored in Bitcoin. It's being mined and it's stored there. And then guess what? That energy becomes more valuable because of the way that Bitcoin is a true yardstick of value. So what other asset class can do that? Try and transfer $1 billion, try and transfer like $1 million, which is nothing, of gold, from New York to LA. You know how much that's going to cost and how difficult that is? And so what are you going to do? Fine art? What are you going to do? Silver or, Beanie Babies, something. But Bitcoin, the magic of Bitcoin is that you can transfer any amount of money, whatever the current value of it is in this slippery US dollar system, for almost negligible cost and practically instantly. And eventually, yes, that's the technological advancement, is we're going to be able to, on the second and third layers, create DeFi on Bitcoin, to create monetary exchange with the same transactional capacity of these other closed networks like Visa or PayPal or whatever. And that is going to render all these other inferior networks such as Ethereum and all these other things totally useless. And I take that back because sure, maybe there's smart contracts, maybe there's all these things and people are already using Ethereum for that and Polkadot and Cardano. But Bitcoin can do all that on its other layers, and that's going to be coming, and it's going to be really interesting to see because Bitcoin is the largest network. But layer one is the most important foundational skeletal element of Bitcoin that blows all these other cryptos away and why they're completely useless. They are all copies of Bitcoin. So the final thing, I just want to say is I do want to once again thank you and agree with you that Ethereum is constantly changing. It's like they're making their network worth less. It might go up in dollar terms for a little bit. I agree with all that. Look, I think that, honestly, I think there's going to be players that really work in the altcoin space that have specific tasks. Like Voyager, for example, the VGX token, I think is going to do extremely well because it gives me more interest on my Bitcoin. I get an extra, and so there's other, coins that do that for other exchanges and whatnot. But I'm saying there are value in some of these projects, but Ethereum is probably not one of them because ultimately I think Bitcoin can do everything that Ethereum does.
All right, thanks, Noah.
All right, well, since you gave me the point, I'll give you one. I have said that there is value in crypto, that there is, like I said, there is value in trustless transactions and there is value in distributed ledgers, specifically for the reasons that you mentioned, that while the fiat system is under control by a central authority, which is quickly becoming hostile, for instance. And Ethereum has a problem in that they basically made a bad decision. Now, don't get me wrong. If Ethereum hadn't made its recent London fork, I would say it's worth more than Bitcoin. Very simply because it does the same thing at less energy and has more functionality. That simple. But with the recent London change and making their currency permanently deflationary, that's stupid because any currency which is deflationary is stupid. The Bitcoin is also stupid because when they stop printing it, it's expected that we will lose Bitcoin over time because people lose their keys. It ends up in a hard drive in a landfill. And thus, there will be permanently less and less and less Bitcoin available, making it deflationary. But again, as a unit of currency, that simply cannot work because currency, money, is more than simply a store of value. It is a store of value. Not a store of value. It has intrinsic value. That value can change depending on what people think of that particular asset. But as you said, that's the case with everything. So first, the $1.4 billion transaction. First off, I would ask, is that dollars or tethers? Second off, because it is a problem. Second off, large transactions aren't a good yardstick if you're measuring speed, because it's basically one very large transaction, and it took a second. Well, what about 1.4 million transactions of 1,000? How efficient is that? Not so efficient. And that's my point, why the value rests in the transactional capability, because you're right that there's still a very large mass of people out there who could start using Bitcoin. But if they did, the liquidity needs of that network would be so high that 21 million is not enough. And then you go to Satoshis, and then you say, well, there's 21 quadrillion. Yeah, but then if the whole world decides to add another zero on it, well, you can keep going that way. So what is it then? Is it the Bitcoin that has value, or is it the Satoshi that has value? And if it's indeed true that there's 21 quadrillion Bitcoin out there effectively because there's 21 quadrillion Satoshi, well, then there's 10 times more liquidity in Bitcoin already than there is in the US dollar. Because if you include cents, the decimal point, which is how Bitcoin cheats, there's something like, what, 2.1 quadrillion dollars out there, but or the monetary base is 2.1 quadrillion, while Bitcoin is 21 quadrillion. So Bitcoin should be worth 10 times as little as the dollar on a Satoshi to Satoshi basis. Now, again, a point for you that indeed Bitcoin stores value on the network, but I'm not arguing that. I'm just arguing that the value that Bitcoin stores on the network is vastly inferior, it's basically nothing, because again, other things can do the same thing. Now, one more thing I want to definitely go into is this whole firewood analogy, because you say that if Bitcoin goes up in value, you can buy more and more firewood. Okay, well, who produces this mystery firewood? How does this firewood get into existence? Well, it requires more energy. Somebody needs to spend energy to chop down a tree. So in that sense, Bitcoin does not store energy. It just uses energy to transact, just like, as you say, if you have to move gold through reality, that also costs energy. Fuel costs, human carrying costs, whatever. So energy is not a good measure of value. Aside from the fact that Bitcoin doesn't store it, because again, coal stores energy, because you can generate energy with coal at a higher rate than it costs for you to collect it. Because if coal generated less energy than it costs us to collect and burn it, it would also have no value, because it would just be a pollutant then.
30 seconds.
All right. So energy is not a store of value, because you cannot determine upfront whether energy is wasted or not. If I use a barrel of oil to convert a piece of gold, or a bar of gold, into a golden jewelry, then that energy was not wasted because somebody wants the jewelry. If I set the same barrel of oil on fire, that energy is wasted because you cannot use that barrel of oil again. So whether we use a barrel of oil to generate Bitcoin or a barrel of oil to generate firewood is a big choice. And as I argue, using the barrel of oil on Bitcoin is simply a waste. Not completely, but for 99.999% waste, or whatever inefficiencies that Bitcoin has.
Thanks, Deso.
Okay. Well, first off, thank you, Deso. I got a lot of points that round, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
I got to be fair.
Okay, we talked about a lot of things there. I just want to go to some of the main things first, and let's start with the firewood because it's fresh on everybody's mind. Firewood does indeed require energy to be chopped down. And so what does that mean? You could consider all the things. The lumberjack needs to eat, or the machine needs to burn fuel, or whatever. And Bitcoin, since it's ever increasing in value, at over 200% a year for the last 11 years, it's as a proportion of the value of a Bitcoin, the static costs of creating that energy, no matter what they are, you could assume whatever they are, those are going down relative to the cost of Bitcoin. those, and certainly, by the way, every other asset class requires energy. You need printing presses and energy and oil to create dollars. You need to mine gold and silver. Those are just axiomatic, kind of arguments. So energy, you said, is not a good store of value because you can't determine if the energy is wasted or not. Well, I would posit that, yes, we could be talking about firewood. We could be talking, you could be talking about buying gold with Bitcoin. I mean, you can buy anything with Bitcoin. You can, and the primary thing that people buy with Bitcoin is actually US dollars. People go in and out of Bitcoin. But the network, again, the proof is in the pudding, and the network keeps growing. The value keeps going up. Sure, it's going up in dollar terms, which I agree is a kind of a slippery, type of argument anyway, because we don't know what those are worth. But the whole system is inflating, like you said, and I think that's affecting all asset classes. Is it going to come crashing down? Is Bitcoin going to come crashing down as people need, as people have margin calls and need liquidity? I don't know, maybe. Is Bitcoin going to crash down to 10,000 before it goes to 500,000? Both are possible. Anything's kind of possible. You again mentioned that the value rests in the transactional volume, and we talked about the difference between one large transaction and 1,000 transactions that are a lot smaller. Again, all solvable, and part of the technology. I mean, that's all coming. Layer 2, layer 3. We're going to have that. But guess what? Even if we don't, the value alone of Bitcoin as a superior store of value is already in the $500,000 range, just if it takes over gold's position as, kind of one of our primary stores of value and as a tier 1 asset class that the central banks use on their books. So the final kind of argument that I want to address, which this one's great. This is like the pizza argument with how many times can you slice a pizza? Bitcoins or sats? Which one have value? And all the arguments you made, I mean, can just be simply summed up in one question, which is, okay, which has more value, $1 or 100 pennies? Okay, like it's the same exact thing. These are just fractionations of units of account. So you can't really say, and if we wanted to add another zero to the end, well, we could do that with dollars. We could do that with whatever. So let's say, already if you go to the gas station, gas is $1.59, and there's a little 9, like 9/10 of a cent. So it's already being done. And you could do that with dollars. You could do that with Bitcoin if it becomes more useful, if that granularity becomes something that the network desires. It's unlikely, but if it is, then consensus will provide that for the network, just as it would for the US dollar. So there's incredible value in the energy storing capacity of Bitcoin. And I believe that your arguments just don't hold water with any of those points.
Fair enough. So then we'll move over to Deso, and then one last segment before closing remarks, just so you guys can get ready.
All right. Well, you said that Bitcoin over its history has been ever increasing in dollar value. Well, that's not true. It's been ever increasing in Tether value, because Tether is valued at $1 according to Tether. But in reality, when push comes to shove and everyone wants dollars instead of tethers, will they be able to find as many dollars for their Bitcoin as they now can find tethers for the Bitcoin? And I simply say no, because a lot of that is fake volume and shenanigans, which are still not clear because, again, Tether hasn't been audited. Now, back to the energy argument. You are wrong in saying that every industry uses up energy. Now, of course, everything requires energy within reality. However, industries such as coal, oil, uranium, and anything which we consider energy or part of the energy sectors actually generate more energy than they use. That is their value. If oil did not give us as much energy as we would put into it, pumping it out of the ground, then oil would not have any value. Steam power, effectively, coal and steam together gives us less power than oil does, and burning oil directly. Therefore, steam power is hardly ever used anymore because it's not as efficient. And again, you cannot toss a Bitcoin into an oven and to get the energy you used on it back. So you might say that you can pay for a piece of firewood with Bitcoin. However, that is also not true. I am not aware of any lumber yards currently accepting Bitcoin. If the vendor of the firewood does not accept whatever asset you are willing to pay for it, then you cannot pay with it. And here I will concede that the same is true for gold. Currently, I'm not entirely up to date on the lumber yards where I can trade lumber for a bar of gold. So, but that goes to my point that demand for gold is eternal, in the fact that maybe the lumberyard doesn't demand gold, but the jeweler does, because gold is used in jewelry. If the transaction capability of Bitcoin isn't there, then it has nothing else. It's just a piece of software that, again, you cannot verify to be immutable without the network. So again, all the value is stored in the network, which I do also agree with you. But again, the value that is stored within the network is inferior because it cannot be energy. The network requires energy to run instead of generating energy to run, or generating more energy in the process while running than it uses. And it's not immutable because the protocol can be changed by consensus, as you admit. And the value of Bitcoin in other things, such as dollar or gold or oil or whatever you want, is also not immutable because that also changes depending on how many people use it. If everybody stopped using Bitcoin right now as a means of transaction completely, that doesn't make the 20 or the 18 million Bitcoin that are printed vanish. They are still on everyone's PCs, but they just won't be used anymore. So what is the value then? Well, it's nothing. Just like the horse-drawn carriage right now isn't exactly very valuable, yet at one point it was. That is the progress of technology, and that is also what you have admitted, is that eventually something better will come along. And here I do want to mention my books again, because so far I've left that knowledge out pretty much, but I've actually already developed a system that's better than gold even. Simply because I've redirected the energy that Bitcoin uses for proof of work to something that is valuable. And just to summarize that, I've tied Bitcoin and proof of work into doing mathematical research calculations. Because no matter how you slice it, all those calculating computers out there that are calculating hashes for Bitcoin, only one can win. Only one hash is right. And everything else is wasted energy. Now, of course, you need it for security at a relative size to the network. But if we make a law that only central banks can mine Bitcoin, then there would be very little energy required for a network that has the same capabilities as it has now. It's still independently verifiable by nodes that are trusted by societies, yet it does not nearly use as much energy as it does now, yet it does the same. In my system, if you reduce the amount of research being done, well, then you do reduce the amount of research being done. It is research that needs to be done. Within science, the wrong answer is not a waste, because generally innovation comes from iterative improvement. You need to get the wrong answer a lot before you get the right answer. In Bitcoin's case, all of that is wasted because the right answer leads you to print a Bitcoin, which does nothing, because Bitcoin also suffers from the next transaction problem. Again, if you take away transactional capability, Bitcoin does nothing.
30 seconds.
So in my system, while it is true that if you take away transactional ability, Bitcoin does nothing, that transaction capability is unique in the fact that it rests on the basis of mathematical research that needs to be done.
Cool. Thanks.
We can get into more of that in a moment if you want.
Sure. So then now, Noah, this will be the last rebuttal before your closing remarks.
Okay.
5-minute rebuttal.
Well, first off, I definitely recommend everybody take a look at Deso's work. His books are excellent and well reasoned and thought out, and it is important to consider every side of these arguments because look, I could be wrong. Who knows what could happen in this world. One thing I would say though is we talk about Deso mentioned something could come along that's better than Bitcoin. Well, I would say that sure, yeah, absolutely could. And guess what? It's going to be built on the Bitcoin network. So Bitcoin 2030 is going to be a lot better than Bitcoin now, but Bitcoin's the dominant network. And all I would have to point you to is look at Amazon. Amazon 2011 versus Amazon 2021. And guess what Amazon 2030 is going to be like? You think something's going to come along and unseat Amazon? I mean, I would take that bet any day. I mean, I'll bet you a Bitcoin. So I don't think that's going to happen. You mentioned immutability again. Look, I get it. Yes, it can be changed by consensus. We're talking immutability and just all of these other things. Yeah, you can talk about these things as absolutes, or you can talk about them on a spectrum. Now, when you look at the US dollar and you compare Bitcoin's immutability to the US dollar, Bitcoin is immutable, okay? It's like 99,000 times more immutable. You've got something like the dollar, which is completely mutable and malleable, and in fact has changed a zillion times, and it's gone down in value nonstop since the beginning of the last century. Well, you compare something like Bitcoin to that, and Bitcoin looks pretty dang immutable. But I agree, it could be changed if the network felt that was more valuable. Just addressing your points, paying for firewood with Bitcoin, yeah, we don't do that right now. But guess what? The network that does, Visa, charges the seller of the firewood 3%. Well, Bitcoin already, and I mentioned Global Strike. Strike is going to enable payments on the Bitcoin network through the Lightning and through these layers. These are coming out in the next however long period of time. I mean, not very long. And guess what? Instead of 3%, the firewood producers are going to be paying 0.001%. And if you're a merchant and all it is a little black box that takes a Visa card or a little black box that takes a Bitcoin card or whatever, you're going to, or a mobile app or however the system, I mean, the mechanics are really easy now with the technology. You're going to the market is going to opt to pay the 0.001% on the Bitcoin transaction versus the 3% on the closed network transaction. So in a couple of years, you're going to be able to buy all that firewood with Bitcoin. Right now, you can just simply sell $50 worth of Bitcoin into US dollars at a negligible cost, and you can buy the firewood. But who would do that? Because Bitcoin's the most perfect store of value the world has ever seen, and it keeps going up in US dollar values. So energy, oil creates more energy than it consumes. You mentioned that. I don't even begin to understand that, because from an engineering perspective, every single thing, every form of energy that we harness in the world has a percentage of its energy lost. So, it's not like you can capture 100% energy of the sun or of oil. It's not like you pull oil out of the ground and then it makes more energy than that doesn't make sense. That's like a deflationary concept when it comes to energy production. And that's certainly not the way it works. So everything costs energy. And Bitcoin happens to be the most efficient store of energy the world has ever seen. Bitcoin ever increasing in Tether value. I guess I'll hit this point last. Look, if Tether collapses, where do you think money's going to run to? Out of Bitcoin? No, money's going to run into Bitcoin. There's going to be other, and all of a sudden US dollar coin or whatever, any other, there's all these other proxies for the US dollar and the stable coin market. And any one of them, money's going to flood into those. Would I hold Tethers? No. Do I think Tether's a good system? No. Do I think there's something shady there? Possibly. I have no idea. I agree with you completely. But I think if Tether ultimately crashes and burns, it's going to send the price of Bitcoin soaring. If anything, it's going to remove that FUD from the market. and people are going to, run into Bitcoin. I mean, people are running into Bitcoin. Bitcoin is like a black hole sucking from every asset class. It's going to suck from bonds. It's going to suck from gold and silver. It's going to suck from real estate. It's going to suck from everywhere. And it's going to grow and keep growing. How often in the human history have we introduced a new asset class, a novel asset class? That's what we've done with Bitcoin. And all the money is flowing into the whole cryptocurrency sphere. And almost all of it is speculation, and I agree with that. I think everything is speculation, the price of gold, the price of the dollar, price of oil, whatever, based on unknown future events and possible tail risk and white swans and all those things. But I think that Bitcoin is the most powerful and compelling store of value and technology that we have ever seen. It is the primary application of, as you mentioned, the blockchain, which is that actual technology. So, Bitcoin is the primary application of the blockchain technology. And I think it's past the tipping point, and that's why it continues to grow in value, continues to grow the network, continues to grow number of users, continues to grow strength and security of the network, and hopefully will be regulated. Hopefully questions will be taken away. And hopefully it keeps going up in value so that people can have a deflationary store of value where they know that their dollars that they make today or their Bitcoin that they make today is worth more firewood in the future, because we need to become savers and we want to become savers again. And Bitcoin is doing that, and it's going to continue to do that.
Really interesting points. Thank you, Noah. So Deso, this would be your last 5-minute rebuttal before closing remarks.
All right. Well, Bitcoin is the dominant network now. Well, so was MySpace at some point. It was the dominant social media network, and it got killed simply because every time you got to their space, music would automatically start playing, and people thought it was annoying. Facebook didn't have that, and it integrated with mobile games in a way very smart to do that, so eventually they supplanted MySpace. I'll be honest, it's hard to think of something that will replace Facebook and Amazon now, but for instance, due to privacy concerns or censorship, or there's plenty of bad things happening right now that would open up the doors to competitors. The US regulators adhering to labor standards, actually, enforcing something on Amazon, that would immediately cut their profitability. The same thing happened with Uber. Uber was disruptive until they actually had to pay their people as regular, humans and workers, and suddenly they're not profitable anymore, and that company will eventually go to zero. And yet it used to be the ride-sharing app. So again, that's normalcy bias. Just because it's gone recently bias, or because it's always gone good, normalcy bias, that means it can't change. Well, it most certainly can't, because all the big companies now are not the same big companies as the last tech bubble. We are in a bubble. Now, I'll give you one point that Bitcoin, in some ways, is better than fiat. Not all of them, in some ways, but that's a low bar compared to fiat. I mean, come on. But Visa asked 3% of fiat because that's a problem with fiat. If the government would run a normal interest rate policy, Visa might ask more, but you would also get more on your savings account. So savings accounts have also been at 0%. That's all a problem with fiat. But my point is that to do the same transaction in Bitcoin as Visa does, you need to consume an order of several orders of magnitude more firewood to actually do it. So what you don't understand from some sectors generating more than they consume, it's very simple. It costs less than a barrel of oil to pump a barrel of oil out of the ground. So it's a net positive. And it's that simple. That's energy. If you get a net positive energy result out of the asset compared to the amount of energy that it costs to generate it, it generates energy. The same the amount of energy that we spend extracting uranium from the ground and processing it and building a nuclear reactor and all of that, and then putting it in, we're still going to get massive amounts of energy more out of that nuclear reactor than all the other processes combined. That's why it's part of the energy sector. That's one of the reasons why coal has exploded in price, even though the whole ESG craze is going on, simply because coal is extremely cheap to get out of the ground. You literally just scrape it off the surface, and it is a very dense form of hydrocarbon. So it generates a lot of energy. Without coal and oil generating more than they consume in the production process, Bitcoin could not exist because there would not be any energy or electricity to consume. And Bitcoin only consumes energy. Therefore, it cannot store it. It must consume it. If you have a battery, well, that can store energy. If, let's say you have a non-rechargeable battery, because it makes the argument simpler, that can hold more energy that's put into production than it costs to produce it, then it will be net positive. Unfortunately, that is not possible because you have to charge the battery, and the charging process costs more than you're ever going to get out of it because of the law of thermodynamics. So that was my point, and that Bitcoin cannot store energy because it cannot generate energy. You cannot generate another Bitcoin by using a Bitcoin. You have to use a lump of coal that then powers the network, that then generates the Bitcoin, or transacts it.
30 seconds.
If transactions costs are lower on Bitcoin at an equal energy cost, people would actually prefer it and switch to Bitcoin, but they're not. Transaction costs are way too high, and Lightning hopes to fix it. And the last argument I really want to still argue on is when Tether collapses, people will run into Bitcoin, it becomes worth more. No. Who is going to sell their Bitcoin for tethers when Tether is worth nothing? No one. No one's going to sell their Bitcoin for tethers. So everyone who's holding tethers loses all their money. At the same time, they can no longer buy Bitcoin because Tether's not worth anything anymore, and no one's crazy enough to sell Bitcoin to them in tethers. But the problem is that Tether is valued at $1 per one tether. So usually when you see a market cap, it's basically just circulating supply times the price. And if you have 100 circulating supply and $10, then the market cap is 1,000. Well, with Tether, it's different. Tether has a market cap of 64 billion, and it's worth 64 billion, simply because the price of Tether is 1. So the moment that stops, 64 billion worth of liquidity is going to vanish. And that means that $64 billion demand in Bitcoin is going to vanish. And all of it has to do with the Tether peg, because the market thinks one Tether is $1 in all cases. We are in this situation. But again, Tether's never been audited, and they need to be audited because of this problem. The CFO of Tether has even admitted, there was back in 2018, when they were having their liquidity crisis and Bitcoin was very high, above 10,000, Giancarlo said his personal message requiring Crypto Capital Corp to give them their money back, because if they didn't do something, Bitcoin would go below 1,000. And he said that, the CFO for Tether. So it is a giant problem that needs to be dealt with first, as well as all the other problems in the crypto industry, which I go through in my book, or at least I try to describe in the book, and I try to fix them all at the same time. Because we need to talk about them.
Thanks for getting those points in there. So now, Noah, take as much time as you need to just hammer home all the points and do a final rebuttal and make closing remarks.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm not going to rebut most of what you just said, Deso, but suffice it to say, you did say $64 billion in Tether. I mean, so what's that, like 5% of the $1 trillion or so that's in Bitcoin? So yeah, okay, fine. Let's say the Bitcoin price moves by 5%. That's like a typical day or a typical couple hours in Bitcoin. So I don't think it's a big deal. But okay, closing arguments. Closing statements. Go buy Bitcoin. You know, I mean, just in case. It just keeps going up. Why would you not join this monetary network where you can potentially save your money? You know, a lot of smart people own Bitcoin. There's more, an ETF is going to come out. There's ever more money flooding into the network. It's gone up 200% a year. You know, put 1 to 5% of your net worth in Bitcoin. Why wouldn't you? I don't understand why you wouldn't. A 0% allocation doesn't make any sense. Bitcoin is just a self-evident truth now at this point, and it's a network that is being adopted, whether people like it or not, whether people argue against it or not. and it's changing the whole future and the world at large, I think, for the better. So I recommend going out and buying some Bitcoin. I recommend doing it on the Voyager platform and getting some Voyager as well, so you can get more interest rate on your Bitcoin, or holding it probably the smartest way in your own cold storage. So buy Bitcoin. If you don't understand the Bitcoin argument at this point, then you need to do more studying, and I really don't have time to help you out there.
Thank you, Noah. That's a lot of great points. So now over to Deso for the last final closing remark.
Well, the final rebuttal is there's not trillions of dollars in Bitcoin because, as I said, the market cap of Bitcoin is determined by the price of Bitcoin times the number of Bitcoin. So if the price of Bitcoin was $10, then the market cap of Bitcoin would be $210 million if all the Bitcoin were printed that will be printed. But for Tether, this is different because the market thinks it's worth $1. So $64 billion worth of liquidity, or 60 billion Tethers worth of liquidity, is seen as $64 billion worth of dollar liquidity. But it's not. We don't actually know how much dollar liquidity there is, but from what we can tell from the broken data collection that is crypto, it's about 10 times less than Tether. So if Tether goes away, the price drops by 90%. It's that simple. Anyway, that was my last rebuttal. For my closing remarks, it's very simple. If you're willing to lose money, if you just consider the money gone for safety reasons, put 5% in crypto. Who gives a shit? If you can suffer 5% loss, it's not a problem. My problem is more with the people who say, mortgage your house and everything else and get into Bitcoin. You should never put all your eggs in one basket. I've got a lot of silver in my vault, but I also have gold. I've got uranium stocks. I've got rare earth stocks. So divest. It's smart. But I'm not going to put 5% in because I know it's not the future. I know there's other things that will supplant it. And I urge everyone to please just buy my books. You're going to need the first two to understand the third one. But if you don't want that, if you just want to see the white paper of the system that I created, that I claim is better than gold and Bitcoin and fiat and every other contender there was, simply because it offers a real, tangible benefit to humanity, and that is an increase in innovation by tying the largest economy of scale, which is currency, directly into mathematical research, well, there is no other system that can do that. Bitcoin can only transact. Gold can transact and be formed into jewelry and everything, but it's stuck in reality. Alchemy is a fun thing, and Star Trek replicators are as well, but they're not here. So digital currency is where it will be at in the future. And as you might remember, my third book is called Ethereal Value and the Crypto Future. So again, I want to remind everyone, I'm not arguing against crypto in general here. I'm simply saying there are problems that Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency do not want to acknowledge and do not want to solve as a result of that. Stuff like limited supply, the 21 million Bitcoin or 21 quadrillion Satoshis, whatever you want. That's not good. You need to have a changeable liquidity supply, because sometimes you have more value in society, sometimes you have less value in society, and money is nothing more than an intermediary representative of that value. So sometimes you need less of it, sometimes you need more of it. And our only problem really comes from the government not being able to keep the dick in the pants. They can't stop printing. So in that sense, what Bitcoin is trying to do, as exemplified by the message in the very first transaction of it, is all very noble, to fix problems with the current fiat system. But in trying to fix those problems, it simply has created more and bigger problems. I agree. Blockchain is a revolution, and it's not going to go away. If that was the case, I would have written 3 books telling everyone why it was going to go away. I wouldn't have called it the crypto future. But in order to fix problems, we have to name them. We have to look at them. We have to think about them. And we can't just simply say there's 11,000 cryptocurrencies out there and 10,999 of them are worthless. then it's just the same as, well, you believe you think 4,199 gods are wrong, and I think 4,200 gods are wrong. You have to give reasons. You have to show why it has value, and you have to show why something doesn't have value. You have to be able to argue it to others to its strictest sense, to its highest accuracy. And in my books, I've chased money back to its very basics: survival. We all have to survive in this world. We all have to put in work one way or another. It costs us energy to move around and put food in our mouths. That is just an unfortunate fact of life. But those resources that we require need to be distributed fairly. And one of the ways to do that is basically just to create sound money. Money is a good way to distribute resources, but we have to do it in a fair and justified way. And I do think crypto will help in that in the future, but Bitcoin simply isn't it. It's first generation technology. The world has passed it by because consensus isn't efficient, not even as a way to upgrade your network. Because again, the Lightning Network was suggested a long, long time ago and still isn't here. And even when it's updated, well, then Bitcoin inherits the flaws of the Lightning Network. And as I understand it, stuff like you have to basically put all your money into a payment channel that you ever want to use in that payment channel. That's not convenient. That's just not efficient. It's not going to work. There are better ways of doing things.
Thanks,
in
Deso.
the end, well, yeah, I can basically stop it there.
All right. Well, the beautiful thing about markets is it's in the long term, it's going to be objective, right? So we'll see who is truly correct in this debate. People can make up their own minds, but I think everyone's going to really, really appreciate you guys coming on and having the heart to just defend and debate a point in front of everyone in the open arena. So thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, follow us on Twitter if you like our point of views. I'm Noah Kaufman, MD, Kaufman, Noahkaufman, MD.
And I'm at Deso Games.
Yeah,
on Twitter and on Twitch, and buy my books. You can find them on every digital bookstore. They're not in print right now, and not in audiobooks. I have to go to jaw surgery tomorrow, so it's going to take a while to recover for the audiobooks. Print, I'm on a waiting list, but the more people that buy the ebooks, I suppose the more chances I get to skip a little bit higher on that list. They're $10 a piece, 3 books. I would recommend everyone to buy all the books because they handle what each book says. One handles money, one handles value, and the third one combines it all into a futuristic system.
All right. Yeah. But 2 great people to follow. So we'll leave it at that. This discussion is for informational purposes only. Nothing in this discussion should be taken as investment advice. Guests are not compensated for their appearance. Do not base any investment decisions on the information presented.